Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Connect Conversations. Today's conversation is all about strategy for implementation of the reliability process. And we have special guest Andrew Frasier with us. It is brought to you as a part of Mobius Connect's ongoing YouTube series, Connect Conversations. I am Kim Fugger, the manager of Mobius Connect, and I will be the moderator for today's session. First, I'd like to take a moment to introduce the host of Connect Conversations, series Global Reliability Improvement Expert, Ron Moore. And as I said, we have special guest Andrew Frasier, who is the managing director of Reliability Manufacturing, a reliability-based change improvement consultancy that he founded over 20 years ago. The main goal is to help establish reliability as a core value in businesses through organizational culture change. Hello, guys. Are you there with us?
We're here.
We're here.
Well, great.
Okay.
Before I officially pass the microphone over to you guys, I just want to encourage our audience here today to submit any questions that they have through the chat function. You can send them directly to Ron or myself, and Ron and Andrew will be more than happy to answer your questions throughout our time today. Your questions will be answered on the air anonymously, so no need to feel like you're getting called out. Ron is here to provide his advice and perspectives from his experiences, and he is here to help you along with Andrew. All right, guys, I'm going to pass it officially over to you now.
And thank you. Well, hi, everybody. I appreciate you joining us. I'm really pleased to have Andrew Frasier. He's a good friend of many, many years and a business colleague over in England. And we're going to be talking about the strategy for implementation of the reliability process. And I'll let Andrew say a little bit more about his background here momentarily. Now, today, at least in my thinking, I've broken down the strategy for implementation into two parts. One is at the executive level, which we'll be talking about first. And then the other is more at the asset level. And they're very much related, but we'll get into that in just a bit. Andrew, why don't you introduce yourself as to a little bit more on your background?
Yeah, thank you, Ron, and hello, everybody. I hope something I have to share with you today is of some value to you. I have a view that people's experience has a large bearing on their approach to reliability. And I have a particular set of experiences that shape my view that fall into sort of two main parts, two sets of experiences. The first is what I did before I got directly involved in reliability. So for the first 20 years of my career, I worked in the chemical industry with a multinational company called ICI, mainly based in England, but also had some overseas experience in Australia. A pretty large company, about 150,000 employees at the time that I joined the organization. My first role as a mechanical engineer was as a plant troubleshooting engineer, helping plants to recover after reliability incidents and try to get to the bottom of specific causes of specific events. That was in the soda ash business, so quite a lot of solids handling equipment involved. I then moved into the nylon fiber business, where we took small plastic pellets, melted them down, extruded them into very thin fibers for carpet and tire manufacturing. And I started off there as a project engineer, then progressed into maintenance management, and then for several years I was a production manager on the site. And then I had the opportunity to move to Australia for 5 or 6 years as an engineering manager on the Botany Bay site, which was the largest operation that ICI had in the country. And that sort of background, I think, having been involved with assets from initial design, some involvement in purchasing, certainly in maintenance, and then in production operations, I think it shaped my approach to reliability. The words asset management weren't around in those days, but certainly it shaped the way I approached when I started to get involved more in reliability. The second set of experiences came from my initial involvement in reliability on the Botany Bay site in Australia. In addition to my engineering management role, I was asked to have a look at how we were performing reliability, not just on our site, but across all of our sites and our various business units. And we were the largest site, so we took a particular focus on what was happening in our organization. And we found a number of things. We found, first of all, that we had a significant, compelling financial business case for a strategic focus on reliability. The numbers were really compelling. The second thing we discovered was that there were already some efforts going on to make improvements in reliability. And these efforts were at various stages of implementation. One of them was to introduce a new state-of-the-art maintenance management system across our 12 manufacturing plants on the site. But there were problems in getting the implementation done and getting it done at pace. I spoke with the project manager, and he basically told me bluntly it was like hitting his head against the brick wall, trying to get engagement from the local manufacturing plants to want to populate the database with accurate information. And so we had, on the one hand, we had a huge value that we could deliver from reliability. But at the same time, we had this sort of conundrum where we didn't have the engagement of manufacturing leaders in the organization. There was various levels of enthusiasm to want to get involved in the process. And it was that got my creative juices going, because I knew that there was a lot of other things we had to do to become reliable. If we were going to have this same problem of inertia in the organization and the slow pace of change, then it was going to be very difficult. And that's what really got me interested. Why we're in this situation, and how do we get everybody on the same page, from leaders all the way through to frontline staff, engaged and involved in wanting to drive reliability improvement in our operations. Ron?
Yeah, and I think a lot of points Andrew's made there about various roles, production, purchasing, engineering, maintenance, and so on, is really a key to assuring a proper implementation strategy. So in my mind, at least, if you want a proper strategy for implementing a reliability strategy, I think the first thing is you have to think of reliability as going beyond maintenance. Maintenance doesn't control reliability, contrary to what might be popular opinion. Most of the defects that affect your reliability, that is your production process, are controlled upstream in design, procurement, and operations. And then maintenance has to deal with those. So, and to that point, in our experience, and by the way, Andrew and I met at Botany site nearly 30 years ago, Andrew.
We did.
I had hair and it was brown. and I have very little and it's white. In any event, what we found over the years are several key elements. Number one, you have to have an executive sponsorship for the implementation process. And by that, I don't just mean permission. What we're talking about is active engagement, much the same as you would have for safety. And it spread over several years, in fact. The second point that I would make, and Andrew will elaborate just a bit here, you really need a good production and maintenance partnership. Yeah, we're here. Hello, whoever you are. So, anyways, you need a really good production and maintenance partnership, one that's production led, because they really control most of the opportunity in a given operation. Third thing you need is some measures that facilitate collaboration, that is shared measures that are at times in conflict. And then the last thing you need is a really good shop floor engagement process. And if you're missing any one of those, you're far less likely to be successful. If you're missing all of them, yeah, good luck. because you'll probably maybe achieve a little bit of improvement, but you'll never be a so-called world-class operation. Andrew, you want to elaborate on some of that?
Sure. Maybe picking up with the executive sponsorship, because we've seen, you and I have both been involved in some engagements where there's been really good executive sponsorship, and in other cases where that hasn't been the case. Just want to say a few things about why the executive sponsorship is really essential for moving at pace with reliability improvement. The first is to have a key communications role in the organization. As we know, if you want people to change, they have to hear the same message 21 or more times in different forms and in different ways. And the role of line management right from the top of the organization is key in that sort of communication process. So that's number one. Number two, I'd say, is leadership behavioral change is essential for engagement of people to do things different in the organization. So it's not, and it's a way, it is a communication in a way, but it's communicating through a change in behavior. So, for example, when we ask frontline people, when you have an unexpected failure of your plant, what sort of typical question do you hear coming down from the top of the organization in that situation? And typically it's, how long is the plant going to be before it's back online? And that kind of drives a certain type of behavior in the organization. Now, in the reliability world, where things occasionally go wrong, people hear a different sort of question coming down from the top. It's more about, before we start the plant back up again, do we know the causes of this failure so that we don't repeat the same thing again in 10 minutes or 10 hours or 10 days because we've got to the bottom of the problem. So they are part of the process of changing the focus of the organization to reliability, and they're adding a different sort of value by asking a different sort of question in the organization. And the third thing I'd say that's another really important reason why the executive engagement is really important. And Ron and I, again, we're working on a project where, on a large manufacturing operation, where we had the engagement of the production director and the engineering director who were determined to lead the process of change from the front together, sort of jointly. And I remember asking them, what level of involvement are you prepared to give to this process? And they said, well, you let us know what we think we should give, but at least they were going to start it off with a pilot process on a critical plant that will at least be available at least half a day every month for as long as it takes to support the effort that it's going on. And a key part of what they did was they were available for communications on the plant, to listen to people's issues, to do with getting the work done. But also, crucially, they were involved in a steering team meeting every month, where the difficulties that people were experiencing bringing about the change were aired and discussed to try and find ways forward of those issues. And one of the issues typically that we come across is, how do you engage the front line of the organization? And sometimes the front line of the organization are not engaged because they haven't received sufficient communication, they've not been trained, they've not been involved in the process. So that can be an answer to the problem. Sometimes they're not engaged because they have seen so many initiatives come and go over many, many years. And so if you want to get their attention and if you want them to believe this change is going to be a lasting change, the fact that they think that this is just going to be another initiative needs to become the focus of, how do we solve that particular problem? The issue is not the lack of engagement. The issue is they believe this is just another initiative that's probably going to fall by the wayside after a couple of years. And on some occasions, we have found the problem is actually that there is a lack of respect for the local leadership in the organization, which again is a different sort of problem that needs to be addressed in a different way through either coaching or some other way to get the the local leadership more on board with walking the talk that's necessary for movement towards a reliability focused sort of organization. So the level, getting some skin in the game, being involved, understanding the organizational root causes of reliability as well as the technical ones is essential, we believe, for a successful reliability change process.
Yeah, I wanted to add to that, Andrew, in contrast to what you've just described, the ones that we've seen lack success is where there isn't that level of engagement. In fact, it's more of a, somebody from on high, like a CEO, has appointed a VP of manufacturing, and then they, more or less wash their hands of it, and they expect that guy to deliver reliability when that guy's not actually running the plants. They're trying to influence the plants. And so they've been given permission, if you will, and typically inadequate resources, and typically a lack of the kind of engagement that Andrew just described. And what eventually happens is whoever's been appointed VP of reliability, they either take another job internally because they get frustrated with that lack of engagement, or alternatively, they find a job in another company where there is that, that level of engagement. So that's, you can just contrast the two. Another way of thinking about this is the executives have the same degree of engagement with reliability as they do safety. And if you have that, then you're far more likely to be successful at that level. Now, of course, the next thing is this production and maintenance partnership. And Andrew, I'll let you speak a little bit to that.
Yeah, if you have a situation where you have, say, you've contracted all your maintenance out and it's been run by a contract organization, then typically in that situation, you expect there's a contract. There are some deliverables as to what the contract maintenance are going to do for the company or for the production organization, and depending on how well that's written, that works well or it doesn't work well. And often in an organization, there's actually scope to have something where they have internal maintenance departments. There's scope to have something similar, I think, between maintenance and sort of operations, which kind of semi sort of formally structures what each department will do for the other department. And what this does is to recognize the significant interdependence that exists particularly between maintenance and operations. One department cannot be successful to deliver their goals without the other. The interdependency is so great. And what's helpful to do is for each department head to get together and to list down the sort of things that, if I'm the maintenance manager and Ron's the production manager, we sit down and we say, what is it that I need to do to help you and your colleagues be successful? And we'll list those down one after the other. What are the important things? And then we'll score those. How well am I doing in my department to deliver on those issues which you are interdependent on from our organization? And we'll give them some sort of score, 1 to 5 or whatever it is, so that we can highlight from that which are the ones, what is it that we are doing or not doing that's causing you the most pain. And then we'll reciprocate and we'll do the same sort of process so that I understand what you understand what my issues are as well. And then we'll commit to doing something over the next 2 to 3 months to address those specific issues, and then we might check in every month to make sure we're on track to actually deliver those sort of improvements. So one of the things it does is recognizes the interdependencies that exist between the two, and also it helps to, I think, show that each department actually cares about the other department. A lot of organizations some organizations we've gone into, sometimes you think that each each of those departments thinks the other department is the enemy of the other. This is the opposite. This is actually working together in an interdependent relationship towards some sort of common goals.
Yeah, and adding to that, the other thing that I think is necessary, you have to demonstrate that by your example to those who work for you, so that they understand there's a little bit different approach being taken to, excuse me, to addressing, excuse me, some of the problems out there. And you can address it either, for example, by your example, or perhaps by direct discussions in group meetings, or by memo or whatever. But you want to convey that really down to the shop floor, I believe. One point I didn't make earlier, I want to make sure is in there. Executives care deeply about safety. If you want to have a safe operation, you have to be really reliable. And I've got lots of data that says a reliable plant is a safe plant. So if executives are sponsoring a reliability program, it's important that we link the reliability effort to the safety effort and vice versa. And we link it back into the additional money and sales you're going to make. So I just wanted to make that point about the relationship between reliability and safety. Now, one thing that I think is really important for this partnership to work effectively beyond the direct communication and the example that they set, there ought to be some shared measures that are used to help facilitate collaboration as opposed to conflict. And so an example there might be production and maintenance are both going to be held accountable for maintenance and repair costs, and for maintenance schedule compliance, and for production schedule compliance. That would be one example. So there's always tension between meeting the production schedule and meeting the maintenance schedule, and usually maintenance loses. So if you hold them both accountable for both sets of numbers and you put their bonus into it, then you're probably going to get a lot more attention to it. Andrew, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I'd seen it taken to a maybe even a slightly higher level than that. One of the site I worked at in botany, one of the things I was a sort of service to the organization in terms of projects. And one of the things I used to do was to go along to a different morning meeting on the site. And I would rotate around every sort of 2 weeks. So I'd go back to the first one again. We had about 12, so we had 12 plants on the site. And when I went into those meetings, there was such a contrast between the different plants in terms of some of the meetings started on time. Some of the meetings, people listened. There's good communication going on. Some of the meetings were just toxic. There was a lot of defensiveness and blame management going on, all that sort of stuff. But there was one particular plant that I used to really enjoy going into the morning meeting. And the meeting started on time. People were respectful, asked clarifying questions. Nothing that wasn't that didn't involve everybody in the meeting got discussed. Anything was taken outside of the meeting, and the meetings were quicker and snappier than anything else. And the whole atmosphere was just completely different. It was a whole team that was involved in getting together, and this intrigued me. And I went along to speak to, there was the technical manager, I think, on the plant, and I said, "How come you guys are so different?" He said, "Well, what we decided about a year or so ago is that we decided that the technical manager, him, the maintenance manager, the production manager, and an improvement manager, they would all be rated the same way by the boss. So they would get common objectives, and they would get, they all got graded at excellent, they all got graded good, and they all received the same bonus. Independent. Now, they had individual things they did that were unique to them in their role, but what that did was recognize that they were totally interdependent on each other in achieving the plant's goal. And I reflected on that, and I took that back to my own personal situation, because I was part of a projects team. I looked after the mechanical and process engineering. I had a colleague who looked after the electrical instrumentation, another colleague that looked after the construction and sort of project management. And we then worked for a technology manager who had other responsibilities apart from projects as well. And what used to happen every year is I would go up to get my objectives. I would agree the objectives, and the other two guys would do exactly the same, and we would just keep them to ourselves. We wouldn't share them. And when you think about it, it was ludicrous. To me, it just didn't make any sense. So we got together, had a discussion, and we agreed with our boss we would be graded the same, because that's a success for us was delivering successful projects. And what happened, as soon as we agreed that, the atmosphere between us changed. And we were there collaborating, working with each other. Each time either of us was talking with a customer, we might hear something that related to something in their domain, what they were doing. We were communicating that back so they were better placed to improve their particular function. So a couple of examples, real life examples that, so this particular one is quite close to my heart.
Yeah, and I want to mention one other. It's not just production and maintenance. Maybe it's purchasing or stores and maintenance. So, for example, purchasing or stores, they want minimum inventory, and they work really hard to see to that. On the other hand, the maintenance guy wants, a spare plant. Well, neither of those two are compatible with the proper, business performance. And so if you hold both parties responsible for the service level or the stock out rate, and both parties responsible for inventory levels or inventory turn, then they have to collaborate to do what's right for the business as a whole. And they have to make compromises from time to time, to make sure that the parts that are needed are there, but not too many. And so having those shared measures that facilitate collaboration as opposed to conflict, I think is way up there in the queue. And like Andrew has just illustrated, you get a change in attitudes about what's important and what you need to work on first, and how you need to do what's right for the business as a whole. So anyways, Andrew, you want to?
Sorry. Yeah, I say, and Ron, that permeates the rest of the organization.
Yeah.
People see that. I could sniff, I don't know, something maybe because I've got a lot of experience in different organizations, you learn to sort of sniff what the atmosphere is like, what the culture is really like, whether it's a good collaborative, proactive organization, whether there's any defensiveness and things going on, because all of that just sucks value out of the business when you have that sort of going on. So when you've got that modeled at the top of the organization, it just naturally permeates the rest of the organization.
Yeah. Now, another issue here that we haven't touched on in any kind of depth is the need to have this shop floor engagement process. Some factoids for you from Bob Kelleher. He deals with teaching people how to be more engaged, and he says that notionally about 30% in a typical company, about 30% of the workforce is truly engaged. That is, they're looking forward to coming to work. They are proactive about what they do, and they seek to solve problems. Okay? About half the workforce is not engaged. Now, they do their job, they do the minimum, but their objective is to get through the day. And then about 20% of the workforce is actively disengaged. That is, they are doing things that are contrary to the best interests of the business. And very often it's not because they are hostile necessarily. It's because they're frustrated with the business environment, and they're frustrated with not being able to get things done, and they're just frustrated. So they do things that are contrary to the best interests of the business. And so it's really important that we get those folks who are just sort of sightseeing, if you will, on board with active engagement, and certainly that we get those guys who are in effect trying to sink your boat unintentionally very often to be more engaged by helping them solve the problems that they see. So, and Andrew, I know you've had a little more experience direct hands-on with this than I have with some of your work. Maybe you could speak to that about your experience on shop floor engagement and how you get that.
Yeah, sure. I think I'll tackle that in sort of two ways. I think the first thing is where you have got a problem of engagement with some people on the shop floor, or it may be a shift, for instance. We were working on a change program with a client, and we were using like a three phase change process. Starting off, and the first phase was engagement, then it was transformation, and then it was sustain after that. And we had so nominally, collectively, along with senior management and others, kind of estimated this engagement process might take about 6 months, because of where the history to do with this particular operation that we were working with. And there were various things that were going on. There was a lot of communication going on. There was people getting involved in training courses to understand what reliability was, to take responsibilities, to take actions from the training, to do stuff. But there was one particular, after about 6 months, there was one particular shift that just refused to engage. So 1 out of 5 shifts is a problem. It's not one person, it's a whole shift that were refusing to actually get engaged in the training, reliability training. And the other shifts were maintenance were, but this was a particular issue with this shift. And it was the shift that if engineers wanted to do any modifications on the plant, and they want to go down and discuss those modifications with production personnel to get their sort of feedback, get their input, that was the shift they didn't want to be on that particular day, because it was always really, really difficult interfacing with them. And we discovered that there was one particular person who was the senior operator on the plant that he was the key guy to focus on in this particular shift. It wasn't the supervisor. In fact, the guy who was the real leader for the shift was the senior operator. When we asked any of the other operators, what do you think about doing improvements in reliability on this machine or this area, they would say, well, what does this person say? I nearly said his name then. We'll call him Steve. What does Steve say? He was the guy, he just ruled everything. And he was refusing to get involved. And that was one of the issues that we had to find a way of addressing this issue. And we discovered that Steve had been on the plant 30 years. He knew how to run that plant with his eyes closed, almost literally, in his knowledge of the plant. And he was a nice guy to communicate with, but he just was so independent. He had a lack of trust going on. He had seen a lot of sort of changes come and go. And he really did, he feared getting involved in this sort of change somehow. So we had to find a way, or the organization to find a way of addressing that issue. He was a good guy, very knowledgeable, but he wasn't engaging. And because of that, his shift wasn't engaging with the process. And one of the things that someone asked was, who does this guy respect in the organization? He didn't have as great a respect for his local management, but there was a supervisor that he used to work for who he did respect. And we knew this supervisor was someone who was already involved and enthusiastic about the reliability change process that was going on. And so this supervisor agreed to go and have a little chat with Steve to find out what was going on. And he actually spoke some home truths to this guy along the way, saying that, I expected better of you. They had a really good personal relationship. But through that sort of conversation, that was the key that unlocked his unwillingness to get involved. And then he and that shift became one of the key leaders for the reliability change process in the operation. So just one sort of anecdote of why it is important to get people involved, but we need to try and understand why they're not involved. It's not usually because they're bad people. It's because we haven't unlocked the key to their engagement yet.
Yeah. Or another example of that, Andrew, would be that, say, the supervisors have been complaining about a particular issue for years, and it's just another pretty face passing through, or just another effort to try to get me involved when they never listen to me, never do anything about it. So
Absolutely,
if you can do that, even if it doesn't matter a whole lot to the business, you will develop an ally just by virtue of resolving that issue with them, and then they're much more willing to come forward with other ideas and other effort to help you improve.
Yeah.
So that there has to be some means by which you address what the underlying issue is in these people that are actively disengaged. Now the other 50% that's not in, sorry.
I would say, and sometimes they're just healthily skeptical.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's the issue, and if I'd been 30 years in the plant and seen stuff going, I would be him. No doubt about it. I would be him. That's the way I would be.
Yeah. So it's now the 50% that are not engaged. A lot of times, if you just simply put them on an improvement team and provide a positive experience out of that, then they will become more engaged just by virtue of being around folks that are in fact actively engaged. So it's really a combination of things. One of the things that I've seen work really well is when you have pick a machine or pick a procedure, okay, and then you take senior level folks from maintenance, from production, and maybe even somebody from engineering, and you have them address the issue, get a good result, and provide that positive reinforcement. And it needs to be something small, not you're not going to change the world. You're going to make this pumping station work well. And so you might go clean it together, because when you work together, you tend to bond, and you might identify the defects together, and you might assign tasks to different people on the team who resolve those, and out of that comes a good outcome. And I'm thinking of the compressor station at the olefins plant, and I'm thinking of the heat exchanger, and so on. You might elaborate on those to get folks involved.
Yeah, and the other thing, just adding to that, there's something about the hands-on cleaning. I mean, I remember the experience. I was on there cleaning the vessel and all that sort of stuff. There's just something, and every time I went past the plant, I would, how is it? Is it still looking as good as it was? There's something about the sort of the ownership that gets created just by the hands-on involvement, which is another part of the engagement process. It's that hands-on involvement and care. But what I wanted to pick up on, Ron, the second thing I wanted to say is that the engagement, really, the direction of the engagement really is for defect elimination.
Yeah,
that is the focus of that. Now, just to sort of clarify exactly what we mean by defect elimination, defects are the root causes of reliability and other operational sort of issues. So in the context of reliability, it might be a spare part that isn't being stored correctly. It may be a machine that's been started up differently on different shifts or by different operators. It might be a repair process where there's not a good quality build plan in place with checkpoints to ensure that stuff has been done to the right standard, and so on. Whole lot of really small things. Now, I think many of you listening, watching will be familiar with the safety pyramid or the safety triangle. That if we want to stop the big issues happening at the top, we have to address hundreds of issues at the bottom to prevent that from happening. And there is a corresponding reliability pyramid, which shows the relationship at the bottom of these defects, thousands of these defects for every one major sort of reliability issue. And I've never been involved in a reliability or a safety investigation and just found one defect was the cause of the incident. That's never ever happened to me. Usually you get the investigation report and you look at it and you see a whole lot of issues that weren't the way that they were supposed to be or should have been to prevent that from happening. And if one or two of those defects hadn't been placed, had it been there, the issue may not have happened, or the consequences may not have been as severe as they actually turned out to be. But this is the key issue for me. The critical thing for me is that many of those issues, when you start to look at them, were already known about by people in the organization. But somehow or other, a default culture has been created where living with defects has become accepted practice, and people just get resigned to the fact that things never quite work the way they should in our organization. Let me give you an example of this. I was speaking with a manufacturing director, and this is a safety example. They'd had a superb run of safety performance for 3 or 4 years, excellent performance. And then suddenly they were hit with a lost time injury. And the lost time injury was an operator who was scalded whilst performing a regular operations task. The reason he was scalded was he didn't normally do that task on his shift. He had previously been trained in doing the task, but the two operators that normally did the task were away doing something else on that particular day. He was asked by his supervisor to carry out the task. So quite sensibly, he got the procedure out and he followed the procedure, but the procedure was wrong. Now, do you think it's just quite possible the other two operators who weren't there knew the procedure was wrong, multiplied by the other 4 or 5 shifts? And yet no one had taken the personal responsibility to eliminate the defect by putting the procedure right, because management hadn't created that sort of expectation of that behavior in the organization, or made it easy for people to get the time to initiate and actually eliminate defects in that situation. So as well as working sort of top down, we can look at loss accounting, we can do criticality analysis, and all that is really important for reliability. As importantly, it's about digging away at the bottom of that reliability pyramid, engaging operations and maintenance technicians and team leaders, people who are closest to the asset, who really know what's going wrong, eliminating the defects on a day-to-day basis so that we avoid, we find some of the solutions to our existing issues, repetitive issues, but also we avoid future issues because we've eliminated the defects at the base.
Yeah. And another comment here, all the things we've been talking about need to be sustained over a 3 or 4 or 5 year period. It's not something you do for 3 months or 6 months and life is good. It's something that you repeatedly do, and once you repeatedly do it, it becomes a habit, and once it's a habit, it's almost automatic, and so you don't really have to think very much about it. So, I'll just kind of summarize. I want to, Andrew, I'll give you a comment or a second here in just a second. I'll give you a chance to comment on what I'm about to say. But sure. Kind of in summary, you got to have a executive sponsorship, not just permission, but active engagement, a good production and maintenance partnership, one that is production led, some shared measures between the functional groups that facilitate collaboration, and then a process for shop floor engagement. And that has to occur over an extended, period of time. And then in just a second, I want to talk a little bit about developing an asset management strategy, which is, at least in my view, down below, at the equipment level. So, Andrew, do you have anything to add to the executive level strategy for implementation?
Just a couple of sort of comments. One is I don't think we've mentioned reliability policy yet in the discussion, but I think it's worth just referring to that. Most organizations will have a safety policy that determines what will happen in safety, and it's something that all departments have to comply with and be proactive in implementing. At some point in the process of a reliability change, it's very helpful in terms of locking in the changes that have already been made, and to foster other changes is to have a reliability policy. One particular client that we worked with, they got to that position maybe about 18 months to 2 years into the reliability change process. So there was already significant momentum being built in with engagement of people that were showing results in the organization. And they wanted to take the next step to make sure this process was sort of locked in. And when it's locked in as a policy, it's a little bit more difficult for people somebody new coming in to a new role, not to have to comply with it to a certain degree. So that's the one point. And I think the other point is regarding succession planning, ensuring that when someone who's a leader who's been involved, whether it's a production leader or a maintenance leader who have made some significant progress with moving forward reliability on the plant, it's really important that we get the succession planning right. And that's a key role of senior leaders to think about who's the next person can they come into that position. Do they have a reliability background? Have they had some exposure to this? Or at the very least, make sure that they're trained in those processes in the early parts of the new role. So planning for succession is really important for sustainability.
Yeah, and I completely agree. Just want to throw in an example of a reliability policy, or how do you develop one? Well, take out your safety policy and read it. Literally, read it. And then ask yourself, what would I add to this to make sure reliability and safety are commingled, they're part and parcel to the same process. So for example, a safety policy might say everyone is responsible for safe behavior. Well, you might modify that to say everyone is responsible for safe and reliable behavior. So that's just an example to maybe get you started. I want to spend a few minutes talking about an asset management strategy. Now, Andrew and I have been exposed to several asset management strategies, and quite frankly, most of them are maintenance strategies rebranded. They're missing a lot of issues or a lot of areas that need to be addressed. And so I just want to mention these before we wrap the day up. Number one is, what are the requirements of the business for those assets over the coming 5-10 years? Because if you don't know what the marketing guys need, right, what they're planning, and you haven't linked that to the requirements for the asset, then you don't really have an asset management strategy. So for example, if you're anticipating doubling of growth over the next 3 or 4 or 5 years, that's a different asset management strategy than one, for example, if you're stable. Yeah, maybe you're just steady growing 2 or 3% per year. And that's different from one where maybe the market is in decline. And so you're anticipating a lower need. And it's also in different than perhaps where you're selling off the business. So each one of your strategies has to be associated with the business requirements for those assets over the coming 5-10 years. The second thing is typically missing is what's production's role? Because production controls on the order of 60-70% of the output. That's not in maintenance's control. And so what's production's role relative to eliminating the defects and the issues and the problems that facilitate greater asset availability, asset utilization? Next question might be, what's purchasing's role under each of those scenarios for the business? Another one might be, what's capital projects role? If I'm the boss and you said, well, we're going to grow 20, 30% next year, and we need this, $100 million to accommodate that. My first question would be, well, what's the current OEE, level measure of the level performance of the existing asset? And you told me 60%. Well, what's really good? You told me 80%. Well, that would not make me happy. You want to spend a bunch of money when you've got 20% in there, probably, after you go do the analysis. So it really is important that you incorporate all these issues into your asset management strategy to accommodate a more comprehensive and reliability driven process. And maybe the last question is, what about disposal? What happens when, we don't need this operation anymore? So there are a bunch of issues that typically are not addressed in a given asset management strategy that I think very much need to be. Andrew, do you have any comments on any of those?
No, nothing to add on that one.
Okay, let's see what time we got. Well, 2:51. It's about time to wrap it up, I reckon. Any last minute comments, Andrew? Or are we?
We're doing good. I'm 5 hours ahead of you, so I'm looking forward to my Valentine's meal with my wife in about 20 minutes time. So
okay, well, you better go take care of that. Kim, are you out there? And we didn't have any questions. I'm a little bit surprised, but maybe we answered all the questions that might have been out there.
No, I think you guys did. Thank you so much. Thank you again, Andrew, for being our special guest, and Ron, as always, for this awesome session. On behalf of our entire team here at Mobius Connect, thank you to our wonderful audience for joining us today, too. Just as a quick reminder, you can see past episodes of Connect Conversations on YouTube and reliabilityconnect.com. Be on the lookout as new episodes typically air every other Tuesday at 2 p.m. Our next one coming up is Training and Development with Tara Hall-Wagner. This is going to be one you guys do want to listen to. If you are interested in engaging with other industry professionals or would like to participate on the industry's live feed and forums on Mobius Connect, visit mobiusconnect.com. And be sure to follow us on social media to stay up to date with the latest community happenings. If you have any questions at all, you can email our team directly at info@mobiusconnect.com. Thanks again for joining us. Have a great day. Happy Valentine's Day and stay safe.